Ratan Tata,
Cyrus Mistry,
Akhilesh Yadav,
Mulayam Singh Yadav,
Steve Jobs,
John Scully,
and Mourinho.
well, Abramovich and a host of other owners, really.
Absolutely. But the reason why we're naming these people is because they've all been involved in their own personal power battles in different scenarios, right? But why are we talking about this, Ayush? The reason we're talking about this is because the Tata Cyrus escapade erupted just last week.
Well, that's because the flavor of this week is power play and power struggles. That's why we're talking about it. I was at Bombay House for 4 days. You guys have also been, contributing with stories. You know exactly what happened. This is one of the ugliest, and in terms of magnitude, one of the biggest corporate boardroom battles that we've
very
ever
briefly,
seen.
let's actually talk about how it all began. It began on Monday,
right?
Quite late in the evening.
We're sitting right here in the evening. We'll give you a little bit of heads up if you haven't been tuned into the news, and then we'll move on to some of the biggest power struggles ever around the world. And they're going to be from all fields, all walks of life. It's not going to be restricted to boardrooms. There's going to be different industries, different fields, and you guys must get in on this debate. You must give us your queries. Talk about other power struggles that we couldn't miss out on. We've just highlighted a few of them because we're short on time and we want to give you.
We actually came across a lot of names, but we have just about.
We could have gone on for hours or days talking about them. Some of them are convoluted enough to do a separate Facebook Live on them altogether. So do write into us on Facebook, on Twitter, on the Bloomberg Quinn handles. Any way you guys want to reach out, shout out from the rooftops and tell us what you think and what you think about these power struggles, really.
So Ayush, getting back to the Ratan Tata and to the Cyrus Mistry issue.
Right.
It started on Monday evening. Right. There was a press release that was sent out by the Tata Group, by Tata Sons specifically.
And that particular press release shocked the entire business community, all of us in office, and the nation, really. Because this is the Tatas you're talking about, right? This is not a group which you associate with this sort of negative publicity. But that's what it's been about all week. Every day there's been some sort of a revelation which has shocked us more, and we're all aghast, as are you.
And what began as just a replacement, and that's what they called it. They said, this is to inform you about the replacement of the chairman of the Tata Sons company.
Well, Alex, potatoes, replacement, ouster, sacking. That's what it is.
But what I was going to say is that it's devolved into a complete mudslinging match.
It has.
So you've actually been at Bombay House. You've had front seat.
Well,
you've had a front seat view of exactly what's been going on.
If you summed it up perfectly in the last line, it's been a slugfest, a mudslinging match out there. On Monday, of course, to give you a quick timeline of events, Alex can, obviously come in and tell me if there's anything I'm missing out. I want to tell you very quickly. We're going to move on to our next big power struggle after that. It started off on Monday when we got a press release that Cyrus Mistry has been replaced as chairman of Tata Sons. And in the interim, for the next 4 months, we'd have none other than Ratan Tata making a comeback, right? He's going to be making a comeback and he'll serve as the interim chairman until a selection committee really searches for a suitable candidate. And that's when we thought, hey, there has to be something more to it. I think a day later is when we went there to report again, and we actually caught up with Mr. Ratan Tata for a brief bit. We were the only ones to, and he said, there's no developments today, Ayush. I was in my office, and that was a statement in itself. After that,
next day was when Cyrus Mistry sent out, or rather, a letter was sent by Cyrus Mistry to the board of directors.
Late on day two.
Yeah.
Right? And that was late, at 10:05, I think the email went out to a lot of the top people at the Tata Group. And that's when we realized that this is what we were all most fearful of. This is a corporate battle which has turned ugly. And it had turned ugly because that letter mentioned several instances of what his defense essentially was, and he was trying to vindicate himself. That's about all we're going to tell you now. There's a lot more on Bloomberg Quint. There's no dearth of coverage there where you can catch up on all of that stuff, right? But after that, yesterday as well, we were outside Bombay House, and Ratan Tata, Tata Sons actually issued a statement as well, trying to defend their defense, right? That's essentially what happened in a nutshell.
And they said that they'd eventually issue a statement responding to all the accusations that have been made by Cyrus Mistry.
Right, and there's a lot at stake out here because this is one of the biggest groups out there.
And so just to tell you, we were just trying to give you a flavor of what we're trying to convey here. We were trying to set the tone because we're going to take you through what we're saying is that the Tatas and the Mistrys and Cyrus Mistry are not alone, then this sort of issue is not unprecedented.
Yeah, this battle between the Shapoorji Pallonji group and the Tata group, well, it isn't unprecedented, right? Essentially, we're talking about the pure emotion out there, which is power, right? And that's why we've called today's Facebook Live the power of power, right? Alex, in the news, if I was to tell you very quickly, to tell me what's the first thing that springs to your mind when it comes to a power battle?
The upcoming UP elections
Spot
and the
on.
Samajwadi Party.
Spot on.
Because I'm sure there are a lot of political battles where families have fought over the leadership of a political party, but in the news this is one of the biggest unfolding stories that we have to follow right now, and that's the Samajwadi Party. And we're actually going to talk very specifically about
Yeah.
Oops.
Oh, that's our next story. but having said that,
Why don't you tell
I
them
will.
about it? I'm going to set
what's
this.
happening in UP is imperative for all of us, because these elections will be coming up very soon. They're going to be announced and we'll know early next year what the dates are. But this is one of the biggest states, and it always has been historically so important for India. We saw how important it was when the general elections took place in 2014. Mr. Modi and Banaras, we saw exactly what the magnitude was like and how crucial it was for him to win that seat. Now we're talking about assembly elections, and they're just as important. And I'll tell you why they're so important. Alex, if you were to tell me that, we're back with our story, but what I was trying to tell you guys was that this is a story, a picture that speaks 1,000 words.
Absolutely.
Right? You have father and son.
You
father,
have political stalwart, and you have young, vibrant leader.
Young, vibrant Premier League watching leader who's really made a name for himself in a short span of time.
Yeah.
And it's also this is someone who paved the way really for him to actually come into active politics.
And so, while I was focusing on the screen, we actually didn't get a chance to introduce the topic as we probably had planned to do.
Mm-hmm.
But it's essentially about two factions that have been created, right? We're talking about the Mulayam Singh Yadav faction, and we're talking about the Akhilesh
Which is
Yadav
a shame,
faction.
really, because you're talking about Team Akhilesh and Team Mulayam. That's what the rhetoric has
But
become.
what are the teams made up of? Let's essentially talk about that.
Yeah.
So Mulayam Singh Yadav is essentially part of or rather the part of the team that Mulayam Singh Yadav is controlling is Amar Singh and his brother, right?
Right, so that's another gentleman, Amar Singh and Shivpal Yadav.
Shivpal Yadav.
These are gentlemen in the eye of the storm,
Yeah.
right? These are people who perhaps are the reason for this rift, and that's what media reports suggest. But let's stick to facts. Let's
Right.
stick to facts, right? Why do we say so? Mulayam Singh Yadav has essentially been very happy with his son's administration of the state. And we've seen a ton of campaigns come out, especially now because you're going to poll election mode.
Early next year.
But that's where the campaigns have already started. Digital campaigns are running, these really professionally shot videos and stuff like that. But having said that, Alex, the rift essentially started when, let's give them a little bit of background on
yeah.
Amar Singh. Amar
right.
Singh returns. He was in political exile.
He was actually
almost.
removed in 2010, according to reports, according to what we've looked at.
Of course he was. And essentially that was also because he was someone who'd become very, very crucial and very key for the party's functioning, and also in terms of their affairs with Delhi and that connection with Delhi. This was a person who's very powerful. And Mulayam Singh Yadav essentially, there was some differences clearly, and he was thrown out of the party. As Alex mentioned.
He rejoined about 6 years back.
Absolutely.
But the real tiff, at least that's what's reported everywhere, is when Shivpal Yadav actually alleged that there were wrongdoings that were going unchallenged.
Yeah.
There was land grabbing that was taking place
Yeah.
that was not being challenged, that was not being taken care of by
Absolutely.
the party, and as a result of which he set himself against Akhilesh Yadav, who is essentially the chief minister and the face of the party.
And this
right
weekend is where all the action came down to, this one weekend.
Yes, it came to a head, so to speak, because Akhilesh
Absolutely.
Yadav has actually fired Shivpal Yadav.
Right.
And Shivpal Yadav has gone one step further and fired
Ram Gopal
Ram
Yadav.
Gopal, yes.
I know it gets
It
confusing
gets
with
a
the
little
Yadavs,
confusing, yes.
but they are all related.
Yes.
That I can tell you. That
Ram
rest
Gopal
assured.
Yadav, by the way, is another brother of Mulayam Singh
Yeah.
Yadav.
So this is basically Akhilesh, the young one, the CM, And this is Mulayam and his brothers, or Akhilesh's uncles, really involved in being in this power struggle and essentially choosing sides. Because Ram Gopal is on this camp,
Yes.
Shivpal is on this camp, and Amar Singh is the purported reason for the rift.
And
that's the power struggle essentially, Alex.
But essentially, as of now, they're also trying to present a united front because
They are, because that's an
because
interesting one.
it's quite dangerous for them in that sense, because they've been undisputed almost in the last election. They won by quite a large margin, if I'm
Absolutely.
not mistaken, and going forward, they may actually face a challenge from the BJP, because the BJP is looking to get it into the action, especially.
Yeah, they're going full on.
considering
They're going full on for the
that
state.
UP is the largest state.
It
right?
is a statement to make.
Yeah.
But having said that also, Alex, it's interesting because while there's talk of a split within the party, and perhaps Akhilesh, there's also murmurs of Akhilesh reorganizing the party without this faction.
And
It's
the
int-
opposite is also
It's
true.
interesting because it's an interesting split, because here is a political stalwart backed by other political stalwarts, and in that very unique environment of Uttar Pradesh, these are people who understand that terrain and have succeeded there time and again. This is a gentleman who's been CM for a short while, but has made quite a bit of an impact. But having said that, a lot of people in UP, the sentiment is this is their popular face. So the party really cannot do much without
They
this
can't
face.
distance themselves
While
from
he
it.
has lost the trust of a lot of top people in the party, especially the guys who are managing and calling the big shots.
And the allegation that he's reportedly made is that he's constantly being undermined by Shivpal Yadav
Right.
and by Amar Singh.
Right.
Amar Singh, on the other hand, has actually gone on record to say that he has no differences with
Of course.
the
He
chief
told the
minister.
media, in fact, he actually told the media that if Akhilesh is down and out, he would be his best friend.
Yeah.
Although everyone is out there. So he's trying to be the knight in
And
shining
there's
armor.
another report, Ayush, that we read that said that Akhilesh Yadav and the questions about him remaining as CM in this time, Mulayam Singh Yadav has gone on record to say that at least for the time being, Akhilesh Yadav will continue to be chief minister.
Yeah.
But once elections get done, then we'll see. So there's no certainty
Because there was also a
about
very controversial statement which everyone caught, and there are 2 or 3 instances which have fueled this debate. One instance also being that Mulayam Singh Yadav actually said that the party MLAs will choose the next chief minister. Then he clarified, because obviously there was a group huddle, and said, hey, you know what, this was not the right the statement which you should have put out. So there was a clarification there. Also, when Shivpal Yadav actually took the stage with Akhilesh Yadav, he did take the mic and actually accused
Akhilesh Yadav of lying. Yes. And this is before the firing took place.
And I think that's when everything escalated and became such a big, muddy
Yes.
affair as well. So that's this power struggle. I mean, this is going to be something that will unfold over the next few months.
And it will have repercussions for a lot of people, especially
Absolutely.
definitely the people in Uttar Pradesh, because it will determine who the next government is. It will also determine a lot of politics in the center.
Absolutely.
Because
And
UP has
most
the
im-
largest number of seats.
Alex, most importantly, it means a lot for the development of Uttar Pradesh.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, we know that the BJP performed well out there in the general elections, right? But now, at least at the state level as well, if the BJP could really pull off a feat, well, then that could mean something that could work wonders for the development
Yes.
of UP. Having said that, he is their popular hero at this point in time, and this is a war going on internally. So unless they really sort things out, it's looking really, really dicey for them right now.
So, what do you say we move on to the next topic? Because I think that's. Do you want to make a point before that?
No, absolutely. Go on. There's no
So-
power struggle here.
There's no power struggle, exactly. So, but I watched football last weekend, and I think the highlight of my weekend was the Chelsea-Manchester United game, and it was even more intense because Mourinho was returning to face his old club.
And the reason, Alex, it was so important was because of the history that gentleman right behind you has with this gentleman who's the owner of Chelsea Football Club, and perhaps the primary reason for them to really be doing so well, considering the inflow of Russian oil money really
Yes.
into the club. The funny bit is that we'll give you a little bit of, for those of you who aren't football fans like Alex and I, this is someone you've seen in a lot of media bites and press bites. Alice, you can let them have a look
Yes,
at Jose
absolutely,
Mourinho.
do that.
This is someone who's obviously, been in the press a lot. The first time he arrived, he was known for his arrogant personality, and he said, I'm here now and I am the special one, because he had won in Portugal with the team and he'd won the Champions League with them. So he was someone who was considered to be one of the greatest managers of all time. And of course, he went on with that image and pursued it.
And Ayush, when he entered at a time when there was just one manager in English football that was dominating
For
things.
years.
For years. He'd come in the early 90s, and a lot of people who are listening to us know exactly who we're talking
Sir
about.
Alex Ferguson.
Sir Alex Ferguson. And what happened was that Mr. Mourinho came in, and in his very first year in charge of Chelsea, of course, with the amount of money that was spent,
Yeah.
I believe it was something close to 70 million pounds.
Absolutely.
If
with,
I'm not
with
mistaken.
Essien
with
and
the number,
Thiago and all
yes.
the players that he purchased.
But with that amount of money and with the players that he purchased, he went and won the Premier League in his maiden season in the English Premier League.
In fact, he went on to win so many things, barring the Champions League, of course, and that's perhaps one of the reasons that Abramovich, the big boss, wasn't too happy with him. But let's talk about the personalities here now, Alex. This is a very successful manager after Chelsea. He did go on to Inter Milan, Real Madrid.
Yes.
All right, and we'll get to the present now very quickly. But it was in his final season, really, at Chelsea, in his first stint, the special one stint,
So
where there were differences.
yeah, but let's just tell them what those stints are, right? Because we actually gone and looked what he won when he joined the club.
Right.
I believe it was 2004 when he joined Chelsea for the first time.
And he won the Premier League.
And he got a 3-year stint, and that was till 2008.
Absolutely.
And that wasn't extended.
Absolutely.
And then he moved on, and he came back to the club in 2000. When was it? 2011?
No, I'll tell you something.
2013.
But it's more important to mention. I have the timelines here as well. 2nd June 2004, he walks in,
Yeah.
strutting in, and he says, "I'm the special one," and he wins, right? So he walks the talk.
Yeah.
This is someone who is living up to that potential and really truly going on to become great, perhaps.
He won
But
the
in
title,
2007, 2008, after all those titles and after such a fantastic run at Chelsea, he was doing well in 2007, 2008 as well. But he was sacked. The reason given was mutual consent on 20th September 2007. Was it no Champions League? That's a European competition. Was it because he had issues with him over independence and freedom?
That was actually what was reported at the time, wasn't it, Ayush? Because there were statements that were made by Mourinho that
Yeah.
suggested that there were differences in terms of the transfer policies, the buying policies, right? The buying policies
Which is
of players.
essentially, which is something that has been precedent setting in the
Yes.
sporting world. There's a time when this is a time when a lot of money has really been coming into the sport. But having said that, those owners want control. They
Yeah.
just don't want to be the guys, in the back rooms and in the boardrooms, really
But I used to
putting
a
that
certain
money in.
extent
They want to take a call and tell you who to buy, how to play, and exactly what to do next.
In a sense, it's like for them. I would think, and this is a personal opinion. Let me clarify that.
Yeah.
It would be like buying your next car, right? In the sense, it needs to be the flashiest, the fastest, the flashiest, the best performing car out there.
Absolutely. In fact, an accusation against a lot of these owners in the Premier League is that a lot of them buy into top Premier League clubs to get into that South Kensington, London lifestyle and perhaps be a part of it. But this was, let's be honest and let's put the facts out there, Roman Abramovich is a big football fan.
Yeah.
And he's done great things
And he
for
knows his
Chelsea.
stuff,
He
yes.
knows his stuff, but he also does make some wasteful buys as well, which have not always turned out to be the best.
Fernando Torres.
They could be great names.
Yeah.
But at the end of the
Which
day,
is
the manager or the CEO of a football club, in terms the CEO being the executive guy, the guy managing all the
Which was
administration.
my point in that they'd like to call the shots, but
That's where we had ego clash number 1, and that was on 20th September 2007.
Yeah.
Then you think he goes on to Inter Milan in Italy, does fantastically, moves on to Real Madrid, has issues at Real Madrid, polarizes the squad because he's a very strong personality. He's an eccentric man, but also very strong personality, polarizes the squad, then has some differences again at the top level. By mutual consent,
He leaves.
He leaves.
and he goes back to Chelsea.
2013, 2014, on 3rd June 2013, I remember, I was actually flipping channels, and then the BBC had a flash saying, "I'm no longer the special one, but this time I'm one of you all."
That's
Right.
what he said when he
That's what he
went
said when
back
he
to
came back.
Chelsea.
And you thought, hey, a humble, more modest Mourinho is here. And he's back because Chelsea needed him then. They were going through a tough patch themselves. They'd sacked a number of managers.
Yes, I think 4 or 5, if I'm not
and
mistaken.
they went on. I mean, that's been something that Abramovich has been infamous for.
Yes.
Sacking managers has been the Ancelottis, the Scolaris, the Hiddens, AVB, Rafa Benitez.
Well, Rafa was interim manager.
And he did well in that short span of time. But they were all eventually, their terms of engagement and their contracts were terminated because, well, obviously he had someone else in mind, right? So, did he not bow down to his will the first time? Well, those are still aspersions that we can't really dispel. But this time around, it seemed like they had mended ways. They had become the best of friends again or something like that. Although last week, before the Chelsea-Manchester United match, Mourinho did say that when he was obviously manager of Manchester United now, which I was going to come to in a bit, he did say that we were never friends. And a ton of media coverage is there on that he said we were never friends.
And that was just last week.
That was just last week. And that's why we thought it was important to bring this up. But on 17 December 2015, we thought he was going to kill it at Chelsea, but he did not. Because Chelsea were languishing, sometimes in the bottom half.
I think they lost 9 games or so.
At a point, they were in the relegation zone, they were mid-table, they didn't seem like a championship winning side.
What is surprising, and a lot of people thought at the time that it was a sacking, but again it says
mutual consent. Right? Because he lost 9 out of 16 games.
But the point that we're trying to bring about with this pair is that this isn't unprecedented in the footballing world either. You have big money coming into very large clubs. You have really dynamic leaders, world leaders, coming in and owning clubs here. And they want to know what their money is doing.
And that's when the ego clashes come in.
Right. So you have, in fact, a lot of managers that come in and state right up front that all the decisions that they make in terms of transfers will be very clearly their own. Jurgen Klopp, for example, came in recently to Liverpool and he made a very distinct shift from his predecessor, Rodgers, who once he left Liverpool complained that his hands were tied when it came to transfers. Jurgen Klopp, I remember, very clearly stated that the transfers that were made by the club would only be done on his say-so, and he would have the final word.
In a way that this new system that we're seeing where managers with strong personalities, just like CEOs in the corporate world, are essentially looking at more control, more independence, is something that has come out in a way out of this rift, because also that was a time, remember, especially in the interim time in between his 2 stints at Chelsea, where sporting directors was a sort of a management guy brought into sport, and he and director of finances, when these guys were calling the shots as to who gets transferred where and who you go scout for, not necessarily at the whims of the manager,
they control the purse
but
strings.
at the whims of the owners, right? So there was an ego clash here. But
they were essentially believed to be, the representatives of the owners when it came to the executive.
And they do all the dirty work.
Yes.
They do all the dirty work and then take the credit for all the good work as well. But that's something where we're seeing those relationships really evolve. Let's get back to the corporate world. What is that one big, massive story from the corporate world in the last, say, 30 years?
And it's also a major success story, Ayush. It's actually a dispute that led to a major success.
That's very interesting that you say that, because love, hate. It keeps changing that relation, but at the end of the day, when it comes back to the corporate world, we've seen the love-hate relationship yield some very positive returns.
Yes. Why don't you do the honors?
This one seems to be...
There we go.
There we go. None other than Steve Jobs and John Scully. Alex, you want to tell us a little bit of a background as to where these guys used to be the best of friends, where Steve Jobs actually poached John Scully from Pepsi. And John Scully was known to be a marketing genius, and that's what Steve Jobs thought Apple needed then to really market their product.
And their meeting was actually very early on in Jobs' career, because he was, 25 at the time?
He was
1983?
in his 20s, mid-20s.
In 1983, he was 25, and he actually sent a letter to Scully asking him to join Apple.
Absolutely.
Right? And they remained friends for about 2 years, which is actually something that Scully writes about later, and he says that he expresses regret at not having extended that friendship.
Absolutely. I think a few years ago we got this explosive interview, really, a revelation of an interview in Forbes magazine, where John Scully said he regretted a lot of things, especially not mending ways with Steve Jobs before he passed away, and this is all documented. Alex, the crux of the issue was a boardroom battle. Which seems familiar to us, so it seems like...
And Scully was actually hired by Steve Jobs.
Absolutely.
And what went... So let's go through what went down, Ayush. So at the time, it was essentially the Apple II that was selling.
That's right.
And Steve Jobs was in charge of the Macintosh project.
And Steve Jobs, being this creative genius of a founder, looked at things as his own baby, really.
Yeah. So he came out with the Mac, the second generation Mac at the time, which, according to Scully in his interview, Scully says that it was believed to be underpowered. And
it didn't work the way it was supposed to work.
Yeah, and therefore it wasn't doing really well when it was introduced. It was lambasted.
And that's why, essentially, he thought it needed a lot more marketing as well. Being a marketing genius, he had a strategy where he priced it really high, I think over $2,000. And Steve Jobs' vision said that he wanted it at a particular rate, which was much lesser than that. And that's where the difference really started to show.
And also in terms of a marketing strategy, the sale of the Apple II was believed to be generating revenues to give Jobs a launch pad for all the other Mac products that he would launch eventually. So essentially, moving ad revenue from the Apple II to the Mac was seen by Scully as something that would not really help the Mac. And in fact, he stated very clearly.
No, and see, till we actually unfold these events and reach D-Day, when the big sacking or the replacement or whatever ouster had really happened in this case, it's interesting because in this same Forbes interview, he says, I'm always surprised, John Scully says, I'm always surprised that people never ask the question, how could two individuals like Steve Jobs and I, who were supposedly inseparable, we were together all the time, we were great personal friends, how could we end up in one of those amazing celebrated clashes? The answer to that, he says, I really blame the board, said Scully, who was recruited from Pepsi in 1983 to bring order to Apple.
Exactly. And the reason why the board got involved is because Jobs wanted to increase the marketing spend and reduce the price of the Mac.
Yeah.
And Scully said absolutely not, because according to him, reducing the price and increasing the market spend simply would not increase the sales of the Mac.
No, absolutely.
And Jobs actually challenged him to take this matter to the board.
And Scully actually said that Jobs went into depression with this because he was very keen on having his baby, the Macintosh, which he was really operating the division, he was very keen on promoting that.
Yes. And so when Jobs challenged Scully to go to the board, I don't think Jobs at that time thought that Scully would actually do it.
Yeah.
But Scully did. And a review was conducted and the board found in favor of Scully.
Yeah.
And eventually Jobs was believed to be too passionate, was the word, too close to the project.
You could call him saying being too guilty of that, but essentially he was removed as the head of the Macintosh division. He continued to be chairman of the company.
So he was removed from all executive functions is what has been reported. And then just later that year in 85, he decided to resign his position and he left. And he spent the next 11, how many years did he spend away?
Almost,
85. Yeah, he joined back in 96.
So 85, he was sacked. In 93, Scully left Apple as well, with all his regrets that he's admitted to in this interview.
But he spent a lot of time away from Apple.
And in 96 was the big year for Steve Jobs.
But Ayush, we need to tell them, Steve Jobs wasn't really, and this is obviously for people who haven't read books on Steve Jobs,
or his biography,
or watched the movie. But he wasn't twiddling his thumbs for those 11 years that he was away from Apple. He actually was involved in the setting up of Pixar.
Yeah, with Next, and of course the acquisition of George Lucas's company, which eventually was Pixar.
Yeah.
And he did some great things. They made some they had some great projects as well. But that was a really, really fateful day when his team of his new company actually pitched an idea to the Apple board.
Yeah, and at that time, what was happening, to set the context, Windows was essentially breaking barriers everywhere. Everybody, and we're kids of Ayush is...
We're millennials.
Yeah, we're tech... Yeah, well,
we are millennials. We are millennials.
You maybe, I don't know, I'm
a
little older than you are.
Just anyway. Don't get fooled by that beard, don't.
1995, around that time was when, 1997 rather, was when Windows 95 hit the stores and it came to all of our houses. I'm sure a lot of us remember that 95 was one of the most iconic Windows operating systems out there. And so when that was done by Windows, Apple was really tensed about it.
They, not only were they caught unaware, but also you must remember that there's a lot of history between Bill Gates and Steve Jobs as well. These are great minds, of
and they've actually worked on projects together.
But yeah, they've worked on projects together, and they've also, Steve Jobs had actually accused Bill Gates and Microsoft of taking, way too much inspiration from the Macintosh OS, or really ripping it off in simpler words.
There were
trying to be politically. There were lawsuits, there were patent suits. So essentially, there was a battle brewing there as well. And at that time, you realize that Windows and Microsoft is really, 75% of market share? And then
more than that. It was actually 80%
close to 80.
Before
Jobs' return.
And before the 95 was launched.
Absolutely. So you can imagine, a 95 was almost ubiquitous. It had reached us 10,000 million miles away in Mumbai as well, all over. It was the coolest thing. Everyone wanted to really be using it.
So in 97, Ayush, it was actually Apple who was scouting for an OS for their computers.
Right.
And they were in touch with another company, but then this idea came from Next, which was Steve Jobs' company.
Yeah.
And then they got to talking with Jobs.
Absolutely. And they had a platform Next called Next Step, which was essentially something way ahead of its time.
Yeah.
And Apple thought, hey, this is it. And when Steve Jobs actually made that return just to pitch it, and that's when he realized that he asked for a value X for the company, but what he was offered for that company, his company Next, was twice that value. So it was 2x.
Okay, so it was, I remember the figure, it was 400 million.
200 to 400 million.
$400 million.
So I want to give them some context, because obviously over the years, that figure seems minuscule.
Yes.
But this is back then in 95, 96, so we're talking about
his company was,
billions.
So his company was bought over by Apple, and he was offered the post of chairman and CEO, which he declined.
No, actually that happened much later, because in 96, when Jill Amelio was actually there.
That's right.
He was actually, they took the stage together, and they realized that Jill Amelio was rambling. Sometimes, Alex, you ramble.
Hey.
Then I got to butt in there and save the day. And sometimes I do as well. And
He's
it works.
Pretending to be cool.
No, sometimes I ramble as well, and he saves the day, and that's how it works. But that's not how it worked with Jill Amelio and Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was essentially the man who was the visionary. And at that time, the company was really doing very badly. They were reporting losses quarter
And that
on
was
quarter.
actually that was the core of the problem. It wasn't just his presentation skills. Jill Amelio was CEO of Apple at a time when the company was making quarterly losses of $700 million.
Upwards of that.
Upwards
as well.
of that.
And that's when I think the board realized that he has to go. And 96, he was shown the door, and immediately they tried to convince none other than Steve Jobs to take the job. And he refused. He said, I'm not going to do this. You guys can search for someone. But
And the problem that he had was that he was uncomfortable being head
with Pixar
of
and
two
Apple.
public companies at the same time.
Of two really popular companies at that time. And that's exactly when he said, I'll be interim chairman. It sounds familiar. I'll be interim chairman whilst you do find a suitable candidate. But then the rest is history, Alex.
Yes.
Apple then grew to become one of the biggest tech empires of all time. And we know how ubiquitous it is because, well, there are iPhones in all of our pockets.
Mine's outside.
iPads, MacBooks, don't show off, Alex. MacBooks and all of that. So you know how big the company is. So this was one boardroom battle, and at the end of the day, well, it's kind of interesting because it comes down to the same emotion, that is power.
Yeah.
While he did come back, he did sell all his stocks off when Apple were in the...
When they were sinking.
He had a 1-year embargo on selling those stocks, and then the second that was lifted, he sold all those stocks. And he said, I didn't think Apple would really do wonders, and the board was not on the right track, but he came back and got them on the right track, and that's when the design genius of Steve Jobs really came about.
Because he was actually, according to what has been written, he was actually at that time focused on making things that looked beautiful and that performed better than anything else that was in the market.
No, and that's the best part, because there's another quote by Scully which we must bring up from this interview. What is his biggest regret, he was asked. He says, I feel most badly though, because after 10 years I was at the company, I wanted to go back to New York where I was from. Why I didn't go to Steve Jobs and say, hey Steve, let's figure out how you can come back and lead your company. I didn't do that. It was a terrible mistake on my part. I can't figure out why I didn't have the wisdom to do that, but I did not. And as life has it, shortly after that, I was fired.
Well, that's one boardroom battle, like we were saying, that went the right way eventually.
Yeah.
But it doesn't all work that way. But there's one other story, Ayush, before we wrap up this this Facebook Live that we have today, that we should actually share with them. We were talking about it, and we're saying that there's a lot of similarity in the mythological references that we have.
Absolutely, and also considering that this is Diwali weekend, we're all hoping to have a fantastic weekend, and we do hope you do as well. But before we actually wish you a happy Diwali, we want to also remind you why we celebrate Diwali. Alex, go ahead.
So he's actually asking me, and this is a story that I've come across from when I was a kid, actually.
Yeah, we all have. It's a story which really transcends any sort of
Absolutely.
beliefs.
So, and I'm sure that a lot of you will be familiar with it, so we won't take too much time. It's essentially the story of how Ram was sent on the Vanvas of 14 years,
well, let's get to the genesis of it. It was essentially because
Dashrath.
King Dashrath, had promised his wife two things. And when his wife, one of his wives, Kekai, actually said that, hey, you know what? I want my son Bharat to be king
of Ayodhya.
And that's when Ram, being the eldest son, should have ideally gotten that post. And that's exactly when Bharat was not too keen on taking that post.
No, so the Vanvas started, right?
So
Ram
she asked
left.
for two things. She asked
Yeah.
for two things. One being the exile for 14 years for Ram, and the second being that her son, Bharat, becomes king. Bharat didn't actually accept it. Although the exile started, he tried to chase Ram and tried to get him back. When he didn't agree, he said, I'm going to be law-abiding and come back after 14 years. He actually took Ram's slippers and placed them on the throne for all that time and never enjoyed that throne himself and never ever enjoyed the royal palace as well.
Absolutely. So there's actually a story in mythology that suggests that people can stay away from power.
Absolutely, and don't have to be that hungry for it. Now, do you want me to finish or should you finish? Because this is something, I don't want a power struggle growing over here.
I'm going to be very magnanimous, as my namesake was supposedly magnanimous, and I'm going to be the same.
Fair enough. I'll tell you what, I have a solution which is absolutely amazing. At the count of three, we wish them a happy Diwali and a goodbye.
Absolutely.
1, 2, 3. A very happy Diwali to you.
The thought counts.
Thank you so much for tuning in.